All right. Good morning, everyone from the Pacific Coast, or maybe afternoon if you're watching in some other time zone. My name is Jason Snider. I'm the co-host of the Profit Manufacturer. And here with me, my co-host is Annette. Good to see you again.
Hi, everybody.
And today we're going to talk about manufacturing models, the pros and cons, just a overview that you could do. This could take hours if we really dove into all the components of it, but this will be a overview of the various manufacturing models. I'll take offshoring, and then Annette will take nearshoring and in-house today. So it's just going to be the two of us today. No guest. I think we've got enough knowledge here to share just between the two of us on this particular subject. So I'm going to start with offshoring, and I have some experience directly in this, and my experience was directly in Shanghai and China. I worked for a Chinese manufacturer for about 3 years, and there are some positives. There's definitely some cons that have been exposed here in the last couple of years with the pandemic and the supply chain logistics challenges and things. But I'm going to start with the positive sides of the offshore, and we can get into the details as well. So from my perspective, positives are obviously the one that's most visible is cost benefits, meaning it's lower cost in most cases, which is why many, as far as lower priced products end up being sourced overseas, is that they can contain costs or have a more structured cost environment so they know what their inputs are going to be. So cost benefits are the one that's most visible there. The second one that's maybe not as visible to many people is access to expertise, especially when there becomes a critical mass, if you will, of manufacturers in a particular product line or something like that, that there'll be a lot of expertise that develops in that particular area. And I can point to my experience directly in China was through textile manufacturing. I worked for a microfiber manufacturer, and we had access to a lot of expertise that had been doing it for several years, in some cases a decade or more. And so there was definitely some expertise that the company I was working for was able to leverage that wasn't available to the best of our knowledge in the U.S. And North America specifically. So access to expertise is an important part of planning out if you're looking to make a decision, nearshoring, offshoring, in-house. Access to expertise is a very important part of it, because if you don't have the knowledge on staff, you're going to have to access it somewhere. So that would be part of the decision-making process, in my view. And then the last one that's not as visible if you don't have experience overseas, offshoring, is a supply ecosystem. And what I mean by that is access to parts, to pieces, little components, or if you're trying to develop a product and you need to quickly put things together or test things, having access to that is really important. And the example I'll give is my time in China again. In Shenzhen, they're developed, which is the city just north of Hong Kong, developed a very robust, and it's still pretty active, electronic components, pieces, parts. You could develop out and try to test things, because pretty much every component you can think of electronics wise is available within a day or less in many cases in Shenzhen. So being able to iterate and test things is a really important part of developing out supply chain in manufacturing and where you're going to be located. That's also part of the considerations. And I would say those are the positives of offshore. On the cons of offshore, one is communication. And what I mean by that is being able to quickly iterate and communicate. There's obviously a time delay if you're sourcing from Asia or having your manufacturing located overseas. Time zone's a big part of it. If you don't have those internal processes of who's going to manage those communications and quickly be able to share either problems or things that you want to get done, communication is part of it. Also, part of that is you need to go visit your manufacturer. If you're sourcing overseas, a visit to the location, I can't stress enough, it's super important. I think this con of communication comes up because people don't spend the time to go out and visit the location. It's a cost that needs to be considered as you're looking for offshore as well, that you need to visit probably twice a year would be my recommendation. The next is, I'll call it the long cash cycle. And what I mean by that is you're going to make anywhere from 30 to 60, sometimes more % cash down to get your order started. That was the default for us as a manufacturer. We required, unless they were a longtime customer that ordered consistently, we wouldn't require a deposit, but everybody else was a 30% minimum before we'd even start. And I know that's pretty normal in Asia in general when you're looking offshore. The manufacturer, because they don't have much protection to go force the buyer to follow through on the contract, requires a down payment, 30%. So you're investing that cash, and it could be 30, 60, 90 days before you even have access to the product to sell. And so you're probably looking at 3, 4, maybe 6 months before that cash is converted back into, or that inventory is converted back into cash. So that's why I refer to it as it's a much longer cash cycle when you're looking offshore. Yes, there's cost benefits, but then you also have to consider the cash flow aspects of it as well. The third one, obviously, it's been very visible in the last few years, is logistics. There's a constrained logistics capability. You can't, the supply chains, the shipping people, the shipping companies weren't able to quickly react to the demand. I mean, it takes several years to build out container ships. It takes several years to build out port facilities. And a massive demand increase wasn't able to be facilitated with those. So there's constraints from that angle. And there's just general logistics complications, tariffs, fees. You have the more complex chain, the more chances of something going sideways. So your cost benefits are visible, but your other areas, I'll call it a technical debt. If you were in the technology sector, well, I'd say it's a logistics debt, in that your pieces of the supply chain puzzle, the logistics part of it, are aging and maybe not be able to react. And you may be caught in the middle if there's a big demand increase, or vice versa. Then the last one kind of runs along the same lines: political risk. A lot of news in the last few years about relations between certain countries. If there's a political instability, you can be banned from being able to import from certain countries for certain components, and maybe just a general ban. And if you don't have any other manufacturers available to you, you run out of product, and all the problems that come along with not having any sales. And so political risk is a big part. It's harder to calculate and understand and express in many cases, but it's definitely something you need to think about as part of this stuff. So anything you want to add to that, Annette, on the offshoring side?
I think one thing is you cut out right when you were talking about political risk. So I want to make sure that everybody understands it. It was right when you cut out. I'm not sure if it was on my end or your end, but just in case, it was political risk or political economic instability, which of course this was all exposed from the pandemic, which you also addressed. But I think that's a very important intangible that we have to identify and be aware of. Well, I think that was a great list of the pros and the cons. Everything has changed dramatically, without a doubt. And we're in a different world when it comes to the different manufacturing models and the different options we have available as manufacturers to manufacture our product.
Right. So you're going to take, which one do you want to take next? Nearshore?
Yes. Oh, I'll be happy to take nearshore. And one question I was going to ask you, I get mixed opinions on this. Do you feel there's any risk of losing IP, intellectual property, whether it's design, whether it doesn't matter if it's tool and die, if it doesn't matter if it's plastic injection molding, or if it's its own products? Is there any risk of losing your IP overseas?
Yes, there's risk all over. I think most people are visible again about China and the challenges of manufacturing there. But it's not exclusive just to China, that this thing about IP. Again, this is where visiting your factories really, or your manufacturing site, is super important. The more visible you are to them, the more their value they're going to place on the relationship and things. And so directly my experience in China was there's all kinds of subcontractors involved, especially the lower value chain products, where the factory you might be working with probably has like 2 or 3 friends, a family, cousins, uncles, relations who has another factory that they send over. If they got too much orders and they can't facilitate it, they will send it out to, their friend's factory to get fulfilled out. And so that's why visiting is very important, because if you're there, the more visible you're present, especially if you're doing QC on site, which we would also recommend having a third-party representative to inspect before it gets loaded on the container, because once it gets loaded on the container, you don't have much options once it's delivered to you. And having those policies in place help to mitigate. It doesn't eliminate any of that risk, but it helps to mitigate. Stronger relationships generally tend to help alleviate some of those concerns. But the other part of the IP set is that maybe something totally outside of where they buy your product, reverse engineer it, and then put it out as their own and things. And so even you may have the best practices around where it's not your manufacturer or your offshoring manufacturer manufacturing it, and then where they're stealing it, it's usually where they're reverse engineering. Somebody else is taking that, reverse engineering it, and calling it their own thing. So it's not just from that particular angle. It's also the other angle. They can just reverse engineer your product in many cases. So,
great answer. Good information on that too. So nearshore, what nearshore is a recent term that means basically manufacturing in another country that's near you. So for example, I'm in California, and so it would be Mexico. And the advantages to that are it's closer geographically, so you can visit. I can't emphasize enough and agree with Jason enough about the importance of visiting your contractors. Creating that relationship, it's paramount to the success of your manufacturing. It's not going to put a bubble around you and not have any problems, but it'll be a lot easier when something comes up. So nearshore has a lot less cost involved in tariffs, duties, customs, just because of the close proximity. And so some people are doing Canadian manufacturing in the United States or Mexico. Those are considered nearshore manufacturers. So if you're watching this in Europe and you're in France, maybe Great Britain might have a manufacturer that you could look at. So nearshoring just means closer proximity to where you are located, where your main offices are located. And so again, a lot of the pros and cons are the same that Jason just reviewed about offshore, and working within the same time zone is also an advantage. So for example, California, the southern part of Mexico is better time zone. The time zone issue is a big issue. I used to work with a Chinese manufacturer. This is, almost 15 years ago. And about 12 years ago. And to be able to communicate, it was a difficult. You do have to get into rhythm and a groove. It's gotten much better, of course, because the communication channels have changed substantially in the last 10, 15 years. However, it is nicer to be in the same time zone. Jason and I are in the same time zone, different states though, but it makes it a lot easier, doesn't it? Definitely. The next one is, and of course, all of these manufacturing models, I want to make sure everybody understands it's a business strategy, and we're trying to give you the pros and cons, the advantages, the disadvantages of all of them, so you can make a good decision in your business. Some of them are tangible and some of them are intangible. And so it's really important that you sit down with your CPA, your executive team, and any other respected business advisors you want to talk to, and us. We'd be happy to help you through that as well. So in-house contracting is when you actually have the production staff in-house. And the number one, well, there's so many positives, but the number one positive is quality control. You can nip it in the bud if there's any problem right off the production line. And so that's very important. The other number two is the nimbleness. You can change things, adapt almost immediately versus having offshore, where it takes time and there's communication, or this way you can sit down and talk to your design staff and your team and get the CAD drawings that you need and get it out and done in a relatively quick process. I've been able to change up some of our designs in the sewn products industry, and within 2 weeks we were in production. And that that is, I would have to ask Jason. I think that's pretty rare if you do offshore to have it that fast. Yeah. And then the logistics, you just walk out in your shop. I mean, there's very little, and it depends, of course, if you're fulfilling from your shop as well. If you just have the production in-house and then you send it to a 3PL, third-party logistics firm. We had a distribution models talk. I should remember this. Episode number 4 or 5, distribution models, and that can help you with that decision as well. I've had the production and the fulfillment in-house, and it was just so easy and so slick. The only issue about that is labor pool and costs. If you have excessive labor costs and the labor pool is minimal, then you might run into some big problems, actually. We talked about that in the distribution models episode that we had. Another advantage of in-house and or in the United States is it's great PR. To say made in the US now is hot, hot, hot. And so there's incredible opportunity for promotion, PR, social media. You can show pictures of your production staff, room people. Make sure you get their approval. Always get your employees' approval if you want them on social media. This is from a California business owner. Even if they walk by, make sure you get their permission. So that's a little sidebar helpful hint. But the PR is just phenomenal right now. It's a very hot trend to manufacture in the United States. The other advantage is job creation. This is huge. I mean, you're giving people jobs, opportunities, and the labor force is under such scrutiny right now, and there's tremendous disruption in the labor pool and the labor workforce. If you can create jobs that are beneficial to the individual as well as their potential career opportunity within your organization and or as a stepping stone to something else, what an incredible impact you would have, as well as the legacy that you're leaving. So these are some of the intangibles. And Jason and I feel very strongly about the opportunity for job creation, just creating jobs. And then the control of production is another thing. It's just all the way through, as I mentioned earlier about the nimbleness, but it's the control of the production process. And so you can do time studies very quickly. You can check out the materials, the quality control, again, back to the quality control. But there's so many advantages to in-house. And then one thing that I wanted to also mention is contract manufacturing that's within the United States, but not in-house. That's part of that distribution models that we talked about in that episode as well. So there's really 4 models. There's the offshore, nearshore, in-house, and then contracted. And contracted is, of course, offshore, nearshore, but it can be in the United States as well. So it depends on what your strategy is as a manufacturer. Do you want to capitalize on the trend of manufacturing in the United States? Do you want to create jobs? You can do that with a contractor as well. Do you want to manage your quality control? There's so many different avenues that you have to think about. What's important to you? What's your mission? What are your values? What kind of culture do you want to create? Those are all part of the mix of the decision you have to make as a strategy of the manufacturing model. So, and also there's a difference too, particularly when it comes to sewn product goods, who owns the fabric. So on a manufacturer, particularly offshore, oftentimes they own the fabric as well as everything else. So that was the Chinese firm that I worked with over a decade ago. They would own the fabric, they would pick the fabric, they would do it. And I thought, nope, I want to do this. And so that's something else you have to think about when you're looking at contractors. Who owns the raw materials? Is it you or is it the contractor? And it doesn't matter whether it's sewn products or a different form, whether it's plastics, or you have to look at that. Always consider an NDA, non-disclosure agreement, that's more important in the United States, actually. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of visiting your contractor, no matter where they are. And that's one of the top advantages of having it in-house and or in the United States, is you get to visit. You need to touch your product. You need to feel it. You need to put your eyes on it. You need to be able to do inventory management whenever you can. And there's no taxes or duties or customs or fees. And in fact, the cost savings, as Jason was talking about, for particularly offshore, is often not as much as you think when you look at all the other costs that are involved when it comes to visiting and going through all of the different aspects of offshore manufacturing, all the costs involved. So that's it in a nutshell. Anything you want to add, Jason?
Yeah, I would add one. I don't know if it's a separate model in itself, but one thing that I've seen, and this is for, I'll say, companies north of probably their 8 figures, but having a model where they would build an entire factory in another country, primarily because the raw materials costs and or access to technical expertise was centered in that particular region or area. And something I saw a lot of, something we explored as a company where it was actually going outside of China. We were exploring just because the costs there were increasing for what we had access to raw materials. So there was some internal discussion about adding another location outside of China for manufacturing because of accessing raw materials and obviously lower cost for us as well. So the other thing I'll bring up is there's a lot of what people say offshoring contract manufacturing that has been based in Asia. They're actually migrating and building factories in Latin America now.
Yes.
It's very visible for at least for myself. It's very active. Let's put it that way. And so the company that you may have been working with, it may be the same exact company, but located now in Latin America and things. So it's a whirlwind of activity that's going on, and a lot of things are changing, moving around. But the key of the most important thing, I think, is, or the most important things for us, is have that relationship and visiting, whether it's nearshore, offshore, in-house. It's all relationships. So if it's in-house, like our talk last week, or our guest last week, is culture's super important. I think one of the reasons a lot of companies choose to outsource is because they haven't built that culture internally that values individuals and their participation in the manufacturing process. Same with nearshore. You have to go visit them. It's easier to, and usually less costly, but you still need to do that. Just because they're either time zone or 1 or 2 time zones away rather than 8 or 9 time zones away, it's still relationship driven. And then same with offshore. If that's where you need to be because of all these different items that we talked about, same thing applies. Just have to be very intentional about what you're looking to build and things.
Excellent. Yep. Good points. Okay. I think we've got a pretty good, very concise pros and cons, advantages, disadvantages of the different manufacturing models. Thanks for bringing that up about the manufacturing model. Not only is Latin America emerging as a production geographic territory, but so is India. India is another one. And I actually presented a study on the state of manufacturing at the end of the year to a group I belong to. And it's amazing how I had started writing the report in September and finished in December, how much had changed just in the 4 months. And so Jason's right. Everything's just changing. So I can only imagine if I went back and updated another 5 months later, how much has changed. So stay tuned. We'll keep you up to date on what's coming, what's going on with manufacturing.
Well, I'd say the one trend that's very clear is the just-in-time model that
yes.
a lot of businesses, from the bigs to the smalls, we're trying to employ. I'd say that's broken isn't the right word, but it's not advantageous to most people anymore.
Well, I think we should have an episode on that, don't you?
Probably, yeah. in the sense of companies are keeping more inventory raw materials on their balance sheets now for good reason. And financial ratios have been driving a lot of these, conversion to cash, turning your inventory over just in time, where you're pushing that risk down the chain to some other party that doesn't share the same outlook that you have. And you're trying to push risk down, but you're not able to control when something does happen. It's totally out of your hands. And so having a buffer of raw materials or other things for being able to still continue to be productive and then also getting sales is an important part of this manufacturing models discussion as well. As you're designing something, is be cognizant of that, bring those things in there. Yes, if you have some more inventory in your balance sheet that is cash, but also think about the risk side of it as well. It's not a everything seamless like we were led to believe beforehand.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And I'm thinking of my own situation with my manufacturing company, how I do have more raw materials on hand just because of that. Yep. And trying to, of course, staying within inventory, turn cycle, which is about every 3 months roughly. But that's different. That's finished goods, and raw materials is, yes, I've got a storehouse of raw materials that I didn't have before, just because of the exposure that of the holes that the pandemic exposed us to. So,
And part of that also is, if you're going to have or wanting to, which we would likely recommend, again, ratios depend on your business model and your cash turn and how long it takes to convert inventory raw materials to sales. Mm-hmm. But having cash reserves is a big part of this discussion as well. Like, obviously, us as Profit First professionals, we would advise building inventory/raw materials accounts, and having that cash available changes the decision-making trajectory that you're going to be involved in. If you're already having cash available, or you already have that cash set aside for it, your decision-making of how you build your model is going to hopefully include that and change because of that. And so reserves of cash, reserves of raw material, reserves of inventory, smooth out these disruptions that I think are going to continue. There's just going to be a lot more upheaval. I don't think it's a bad thing, to be honest. I think it's a good thing. We've needed to interject some different ideas into our business models, and took the pandemic to do it. But I think there's going to be, again, more changes coming, and for us as business owners, building those reserves to smooth those things out is, I think, are really important.
Excellent way to end the conversation. Excellent. All right. Well, look forward to talking next week. What we're going to be talking about, actually, COGS pricing, breaking that out, especially the Profit First way. So looking forward to everybody. See you later. Thank you so much for joining us on episode 9, Manufacturing Models.
We'll see everybody next week. Thanks.